Hey, it's Charlie from Charlie Reads and Reviews, and it's December. Cannot believe that 2022 is almost over. I've just finished my 78th book for the year. My very loose challenge for the year was 50 books, which I hit in July. So I've just been reading for fun for the rest of the year, with like a loose way of maybe I'll get to 100. I had the opportunity to reach 100 if I had read more books in October and November, but I only read 2 books in November, and I read 4 books but finished 2 in November. Just finished the third one just now, and my aim is to finish the fourth one that I was reading in November later this evening. It's the 2nd of December for context. But no pressure. Like, the whole point of reading is for enjoyment and not really to hit these like big, hairy, audacious goals and stats. I think it just puts a lot of pressure, and it's part of the reason why I crashed and burned last year. But yeah, this video is not about that. This video is about series. Hey, it's Charlie from Charlie Reads and Reviews, and it's December. Cannot believe that 2022 is almost over. I've just finished my 78th book for the year. My very loose challenge for the year was 50 books, which I hit in July. So I've just been reading for fun for the rest of the year, with like a loose way of maybe I'll get to 100. I had the opportunity to reach 100 if I had read more books in October and November, but I only read 2 books in November, and I read 4 books but finished 2 in November. Just finished the third one just now, and my aim is to finish the fourth one that I was reading in November later this evening. It's the 2nd of December for context. But no pressure. Like, the whole point of reading is for enjoyment and not really to hit these like big, hairy, audacious goals and stats. I think it just puts a lot of pressure, and it's part of the reason why I crashed and burned last year. But yeah, this video is not about that. This video is about series. So I've seen a lot of videos of people talking about they started a series and they haven't finished it, and I was like, that's weird. That's suspicious. That's strange. Sorry, I'm drinking some water. It is hot today and I'm feeling extra thirsty. But yeah, and then because I'm the type of person who will start a series, especially if all of the books exist, and then if I like that first book, before I even finish it, I've purchased the rest of the books in the series, and I will that's all I'm reading are those books. But I have to admit, since I got really involved in Bookstagram, I haven't been very good at completing series. And so I have been reflecting since 2019 how many series I have started that have either been, they're all completed, I think. Yeah, they're all completed that I've not finished, and I've got a list of 11. I'm trying to think. All of these, barring one, I actually own physical books, but I just didn't feel like looking for them. So I'm going to be putting up on either side, the image of the books that I'm talking about. So let's get into it. This is going to be my aim to try and read some of them in December. I'm not taking any leave. In fact, I'm heading to Cape Town for work. So that's also part of the reason why my reading has slowed down. I've been traveling a lot for work, and that really exhausts me. And like the stress of whatever it is that I'm going to be doing when I get there, and the prep for it, and getting my cats into a cattery, and all these things that you have to prep when you travel really stress me out, and I just find myself not able to read. I've also been trying to cut back on listening to audiobooks. I mean, there's great value in me utilizing my Scribd subscription, and as well as my Audible one, but I own a lot of physical books, and I just wanted to really encourage myself to read more of them. So yeah, anyways, let's talk about these 11 series that I'm hoping to read some of them in December, but definitely in 2023. So the first one is Raybearer, the Raybearer series by Jordan Ifueko. The first one came out in, at least I got it, I think in September or October 2020. Yeah, 2020. And sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Okay, no. And it's a YA fantasy that is set in a fictional world that is inspired by cultures in our current world, predominantly different cultures that are representative of the African continent, but there's also representation from East Asia, South Asia, Far East Asia, Europe, several parts of Europe, and the Americas. And I really, really enjoyed it. I found it was well written. I loved the representation, and it just didn't feel like on the nose. So it's a duology. It's going to be adapted for screen. I can't recall if it's for TV or for film, but I'm very, very, very keen to finish the duology by then. I own it, the second book, so I'm hoping to read it this month, definitely in January. Absolutely loved Tarasai and that world. So no real reason as to why I haven't picked it up, because I do own it. So I think it's just a case of me just making the decision to read it. Then the second one is the Wormwood trilogy. So this is a sci-fi set in Nigeria, and it is an alien contact story. So it opens up with aliens landing in London and saying, nope, not participating in this mess. And then they pop up in this uninhabited part of Nigeria, and they build out this strange dome. And from this dome, there are these spores that are emitted into the environment, and they have this interesting effect on human beings. Each person has a different interaction or reaction to these spores. Mostly people get healed if they have some kind of ailment, and these are like serious ailments, like I think it's physical ones like blindness and injuries, but also like cancer. But the one that's really interesting, the reaction that is the most interesting and ends up being the most valuable for the Nigerian government, are people who end up becoming kind of psychic. They get to connect to this invisible network that the spores have built out, and that enables them to see people's intentions, amongst other things. And the story kind of opens up where, I've forgotten what the main character's name is, but we open up to him being called in by the equivalent of the FBI in Nigeria to uncover a conspiracy where they believe that a lot of these, because they end up hiring a whole bunch of them to work for them, and a lot of them are dying. Initially it looks like it's like accidental or just coincidental or natural causes, but very quickly it becomes clear that they're being specifically targeted by an unknown threat. And so our protagonist gets involved because his life is also in danger, as he is also one of the people whose lives are a threat. It is a wonderfully written book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hate that main character. He's an unlikable person, but yet you still find yourself kind of hoping that he wins in the end. Loved it. It's a trilogy, and I own the remaining two in this trilogy, and genuinely cannot tell you why I haven't picked them up, because I own them. They're on my shelf somewhere. So definitely want to pick them up in January. And I think what I want to do next year, I've got a couple of different challenges I'm setting up for myself for the next 5 years around reading more, diversity around the world, etc. But I think how I want to start off the first 6 months of the year, like I'm not giving myself like, you need to read 50, 100 books or whatever. I'm just saying, Charlie, what you're going to do is finish all of these series, finish any book that I started that I haven't finished, not because I was DNFing it, but because, I don't know, I just forgot about it. That's a different video. I don't know if I'll do one for that, but that is my aim for next year. So this is definitely a book. These two books I will definitely read in Jan back to back and get them out the way. The next one is the Patternmaster series, or it's got another name as well, but I can't recall now. This is by Octavia E. Butler. I joined a OEB slow readathon in, I think it started in September 2020. And that's how I ended up reading like Kindred, and a bunch of other books by Octavia Butler that I'd never read before. And one of them was the Patternmaster series, which is Wild Seed, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then Mind of My Mind was the second book in this. It is like I'd say it's a 4.5 book series. So there are 4 books that are still very easy, relatively easy to get access to. There is a 5th book that Octavia withdrew. So it was published and then she withdrew it. There are still some places in America where you can get it. So I'm in 2 minds about whether I want to try and figure out how to get it, because it would be great to read it. But also, at the same time, there's a reason why she pulled it off. There's a reason why she didn't want it out in the world. And so part of me is like, maybe I need to respect that. But anyway, so I've read 2 out of 4 of them. I own the 3rd one on my Kindle. So I own all 3 of them on my Kindle because I couldn't find them when in 2020 books in South Africa were in general, they were limited, but even worse so because of the pandemic and the impact that it had on logistics and shipping. So I've seen Wild Seed in bookstores and Mind by Mind, but I haven't seen the other 2 yet. I think it's Clay's Arc, and I can't remember what the 4th one is. But I own the 3rd one, Clay's Arc, and I just need to get the 4th one and finish that series. I'm very excited to actually finish it next year. The next one is Escaping Exodus. So I read Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden in February, and I enjoyed it. It was really interesting, completely out there. It's set out in space. 300 years from now, humans have destroyed Earth, and now we live in these spaceships that feed off of these space beasts. It's a brilliant book in that it makes you question a lot of things about what it means to be human and the ways in which we are actually pretty terrible, even though we live in this utopian kind of world. And so the second book is called Escaping Exodus Symbiosis, which sounds interesting, but I can imagine it's probably not going to be as good as Escaping Exodus. And Escaping Exodus, as good as it was, I gave it a 4. It's not like the best sci-fi I've ever read. I just liked that it was different. So I am keen to finish that series. And the next one is Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I have all 3 books. In fact, I have 2 of the first one because, I don't know, I didn't realize I owned it already. I don't know. I'm a hot mess. But I've decided to keep it, to give it as a giveaway. I think I hit 3 years on Bookstagram in Jan, and I think it'd be cool to give it away as a giveaway because it is one of my favorite books, fantasies that I've ever read. So in a way, maybe that's what I was subconsciously doing. I was purchasing it for somebody else. All right, so Broken Earth Trilogy, I've read the first book, which is the 5th season. And I own books 2 and 3. And genuinely, the reason I haven't picked them up yet was because of all the different challenges I was giving myself in like September through. And now I'm just a bit tired. I cannot imagine picking it up. Because it's I wouldn't call it high fantasy, but it is not low fantasy. So there is a need for me to be fully focused and present in it, and I think like the mood that I'm in right now is not that. I need some light cozy reading at this point in time, so I am leaving that for like February, March next year to read both books back to back and not read anything else in between, because I think that's kind of where I tend to lose the plot. Because typically when I do read a series, I literally go, here's book 1, then I read book 2, then I read book 3, then I read book 4, and I'm done with the series. And unless, of course, there's a book that I'm waiting to come out. So I'd like to get back into that kind of rhythm of things. I just think it's better. I think it's better that way. Unless, of course, the second book is not available. All right, then the next one is the Daevabad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty or Shannon Chakraborty. Absolutely love that. There are 3 in the original trilogy, there are three. I've read two of the three. I listened to the first two because I didn't own the physical copies yet. I loved them so much that I now own the physical copies, and someday I'll read those. I'll do a reread where I actually read the physical copies. But the third one is I always owned, so that's why I had to get through the first two to get to the third one. And so whilst it is available on script, the third one as an audiobook, I want to read it physically, and I think that's part of the reason why I haven't picked it up. It's like this thick, and I'm just like, I don't know when I'm going to get to it. But I'm thinking March would be a good time for me to read that. I think that's a good time for me to kind of set it up, because I would have finished the Broken Earth trilogy. You see, this is me convincing myself. I would have finished the Broken Earth trilogy in Feb, and then in March I read. I think it's The Empire of Gold is the third one. There is a new book that recently came out. It's not part of the trilogy, but it's like what's a companion to the trilogy, and it's like the River of Silver or something like that. I love that she always uses some kind of metal in one of them. I think the first one was City of Brass, then it was Kingdom of Copper, and then Empire of Gold, and now I think it's River of Silver. So I am really keen to get the River of Silver whenever that happens, but for me to say that the series is finished is for me to finish Empire of Gold. The next one is, I actually don't know what this series is called. So I read the Gilded ones earlier this year. Oh, Deathless. Okay, cool. Let me just see how many books there are in this series, if there's going to be more. Oh, there's going to be 3. Okay, so this is going to be a trilogy. So I read the Gilded ones in July, I believe. July or August this year. And then I got the Merciless ones, which I have not read, which is the second book in the Deathless series. And I hear there's a third one coming out at some point in time. So, yeah, I definitely think... Actually, I could try and read the Merciless ones in December, because I think it's light enough that I could read it in December and not feel too much pressure. Like, read a lot of YA fantasy, I think, in these series. I think that would be good for me. But, like, very soon in the year, I definitely will get to that. So that's finished. I obviously can't finish this series because the third one hasn't been published yet. So, but at least I'll have caught up. So that's another one. So it's actually 12 series. Let me just actually put it here so that I can mark them off when I am done. Then the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I absolutely love this, and this series is actually finished. The fourth book, I think it's called The Speaking Bones, came out this year. Look at me pushing myself into 2023 already. Jesus, Charles. And I read The Grace of Kings, which I absolutely loved, and I own book 2, which I think is A Wall of Storms. When I was reading The Grace of Kings, I will tell you this, I think it was absolutely wonderfully written. I love Ken Liu's work so much that I've gone in and bought a bunch of his other works, these 2 collections, short story collections, just so I could own them. I haven't purchased the entire series yet because I've decided that what I want to do is get myself to finish each one before I buy the next one. So I've got A Wall of Storms. I bought it as I was like in the last 80% of The Grace of Kings. And then when I'm about 80% of the way through Wall of Storms, I'll buy the next one, which I think is The Veiled Throne or something like that. So when I was reading The Grace of Kings, I have to tell you that I thought, I don't know where he can go. Like, I don't know how this book ends up being 4 books in this dynasty, because this one was quite thick. It was 600 and something pages, and each book gets progressively thicker. And I just was like, what more? Like, we have finished the series. We have finished the story. This war is over by the time you get... Sorry if this is a bit of a spoiler. It's not meant to be, but that's how I was feeling. And then literally the last chapter, which is like 4, 5, maybe 10 pages, Ken Liu sets up book 2 in a way that I was like, I did not see that coming. And it's brilliant because it makes so much fucking sense as to how this is going to continue over another 3 books. And I'm here for them. So I'm very, very keen to get into that. I think I might actually start this in Jan because I really, 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 really enjoyed Grace of Kings. I really like Ken Liu's writing. It's just really, like, it's just very lyrical and beautiful, and it also just conjures up all of these images, but it also makes you reflect on life, and you're just like, maybe that's why I did these things. Oh, wow, is that what it means to be human? It's just, this is why I love fantasy and sci-fi. I just want to put it out there because it lets you, it's not on your nose, like, here it is, this is exactly what humans are like, blah, blah, like you find in non-fiction. And it's also not, like, cheesy like you find in romance. I find romance to be cheesy. But it's just like, it takes you on this journey of exploration, and it leads you to explore and examine humanity, and then it's up to you what you interpret from that. And I love that. Anyways, so I've read 1 out of 4 books, and I own the second one, but I only will consider this completely finished when I read all 4. And so I'll definitely be purchasing the remaining 2 next year, but only when I reach like 80% of the way through the current book. And then the aim is, as soon as I finish it, I have the book there and I start it. So it's not sitting on my shelf gathering dust and then I forget about it. All right, then the next book series is Remembrance of Earth's Past. So this is a really tough one. It is sci-fi by Liu Cixin. I read the first book, which is the 3-body problem, which is so good, but it's so technical that it really got me into a little bit of a reading slump at some point because my brain cells were fried by the time I was done. But I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was really refreshing for me to see sci-fi, especially alien contact, from an Asian perspective, and not just Asian American, but like an Asian in China perspective, where you get to see like the way he wrote it, it was so visceral that I could imagine that this actually happened. I can imagine that he's revealed some secrets, and because he's written it as fiction, we think it's not true, but in reality, it is true. So I own the remaining books in the series. I believe there are 3. I think it's Dark Forest, and I can't remember what the other book's name is, but I own them all. As well as a standalone, I think it's a collection of short stories by Liu Cixin, and I definitely want to read all 3 of them, so the 2 remaining in the series plus the standalone. But I think this is one of those where I know I'm going to read, so I'll probably, maybe Jan's not too hectic of a month, read the Dark Forest, I think that's book 2, and then take a break for like 2 months before I read the next book, and then take a 2-month break before I read the next one, because my brains work extra time when Liu Cixin writes. But it's a good thing. Okay, then Greenbone Saga by Vandali. Absolutely loved Jade City. I own Jade War, but I haven't gotten Jade Legacy yet. So there are technically 3 books in this series, but there's also like a prequel. I've forgotten what the name of it is, but I'll definitely put an image up of it. I can't see that here in South Africa, but I definitely want to get Jade Legacy. But again, similar way of how I'm doing the Dandelion Dynasty, where I only buy the book when I'm like 80% of the way of the current book I'm reading. So I definitely want to get to Jade War as soon as I can. I just realized I've put everything in Jan. So maybe Feb or March, but definitely by April, I would love to have read Jade War. What I loved about Jade City. So initially when I was reading it, I came from like reading like these high fantasy books of the 5th season, and then the City of Brass, and then I read Jade City. And so it was like very different, because this is like urban fantasy with a bit of historical fiction put into it. And so initially I was like discombobulated coming from like this high fantasy to urban fantasy. But by the time I finished it, I was like, this is such a brilliant book. Like I said, the reason why I like sci-fi and fantasy is just the way it just makes you examine humanity. And from this perspective, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, most people go on about the political intrigue. It is phenomenal, the political intrigue in this. And I am excited to see where it goes to in Jade War and Jade Legacy. So definitely finishing that one next year. The next one is one that I really am ashamed to say that I have not completed, and that's the African Trilogy by Chinua Achebe. I have read Things Fall Apart twice. The first time I ever read Things Fall Apart, though, was only 2018. Oh. I'm ashamed to say that I am an African living in Africa, and this African classic was only read by me in my mid-30s. It's fine. I've done it now, and I've read it twice and really enjoyed it. I listened to it on audiobook on Audible, and now I actually own it 3 times now, because I own it as an audiobook. I owned it as a physical standalone book, and then I bought the African Trilogy. And the reason I bought the African Trilogy was 3-in-1 is maybe to encourage myself to actually finish the entire trilogy. So Things Fall Apart, and I think it's Arrow of God, and No Longer at Ease. I don't know, it's the 3 of them. And I don't know what the other 2 relates to because I've never read them, but I'm very keen to read them. In fact, I think I'm going to read them in December. I think I cannot leave this year having not read the 3 of them. And that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read it in December. Like Merciless Ones, The Redemptor by Jordan F. Wickle, and the African Trilogy by Chinua Achebe. That's my TBR for December. You heard it here. We'll see if I stick to it, but it is the aim. This series is one that's going to take me a fucking long time to read, but I'm basically going to pace myself out for the rest of next year to read the series, and I think I'll start it out in May or June, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So I read A Game of Thrones in 2019, and I know it's ridiculous because I loved that series. I've actually owned the physical book A Game of Thrones since I first watched the series in 2011. I don't know, I just couldn't get into it. I kept trying, I just couldn't get into it. So I got an audiobook. So I own audiobook for book 1 and 2 in the series. I listened to book 1, loved it, but couldn't get into book 2 as an audiobook. I physically now own, I think, 5 of them. I don't know. I own a bunch of them. And I'm basically just going to read as many of them as I can. Apparently there are 7. There's also the prequel, which House of Dragon is premised off of, that I own. But I want to start off with the actual A Song of Ice and Fire series, read all that exist, and then get into the prequel. So that, I think, just based on how thick those books are, will take me all the way to the end of the year. And yeah, I'm just gonna plod at them and keep going and see how it goes. And that's it. Those are the 12 series that I'm hoping to finish by the end of next year. I say all of this knowing that I haven't mentioned there's a bunch of other series I've started that don't have book 2s yet, like Onyeka and the Sun Academy and the Sunbearer Trials. I'm currently reading Amari and the Night Brothers, but I own the second book, but I haven't read it. So I say 12, but really in reality it's probably a lot more than that. But yeah, that's my aim for next year, is to say on the 2nd of December 2023, here's my wrap up of the series that I said I was going to finish and how well I did. And I'd love to get like a Ballon d'Or, a golden boot, for having finished all 12 plus. Happy Friday.